on my iPod Touch, I had that one song on my phone.
Mm.
And finally, I let the North Koreans listen to it.
Mm.
And I told them this is the #1 song right now in the world. And they were so proud in a weird way. They said, oh, a Korean person wrote the #1 song in the world.
전 세계를 휩쓴 싸이의 강남스타일 열풍이 불었을 때 그녀를 통해 노래를 접한 북한 사람들은 나만의 노래가 세계를 제패했다며 마치 자신의 일처럼 자부심을 느꼈다고 합니다. 2025년 넷플릭스 최고 히트작인 K-pop 데모문터스도 역시 북한에서는 인기를 끌고 있겠죠. 우리는 어떤 의미로 이를 받아들여야 할까요? 이 질문에 답을 줄 수 있는 특별한 저널리스트가 있습니다. AP 통신 평양 특파원이었던 진리, 한국 이름 이진희. 우리는 북한 주민들과 직접 만날 수 없습니다. 그래서 우리는 진리에게 물었습니다. 그녀가 평양의 거리에서 직접 보고 듣고 느낀 북한 사람들의 진짜 목소리를 지금부터 여러분들께 전해드립니다. Today we are gonna listen to Ms. Jin Lee, 이진 선생님, on North Korea and her experience and her expertise on North Korea. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. So my name is Jean Lee, but actually I have several different names because my Korean name is Lee Jun-hee, but nobody calls me that. My family in Korea, they all call me Jin-hee. And of course, in North Korea, I had another name, which was Ri Jin-hee. So depending on where I am, I go by different names, but in the United States, I'm known as Jean. So I am a second-generation Korean American. I was born and raised in the state of Minnesota here in the United States. And I should mention that I was raised in a very tight-knit Korean American community. And part of the reason I became interested in North Korea was that many of the families that I grew up with had their roots in North Korea. And I think this is very interesting because when you think about many of those refugees who left, they fled the fighting in North Korea, they migrated to South Korea, and in many ways, South Korea was not their home, and many of them continued on to the United States. So one interesting thing to note is that many of our communities here in the United States, our Korean American communities, have ties to North Korea. Now, my family is from Seoul. They're from South Korea, but I think every Korean family probably has some family in North Korea, including myself. I will tell you that one of the inspirations for me was our closest friends in Minnesota growing up. And we are grieving the passing of my friend's father, who passed away last week, Dr. Kyu-hyun Wang. He was born in North Korea, in Kaesong, and I grew up with the story of how he was a teenager when his family sent him south for safety. And then, of course, during the war, the border closed. So he ended up on the South Korean side, never saw his parents again, and then migrated, became, was essentially an orphan in South Korea, but managed to survive, made his way to the United States, became an American, and raised a family in the United States, and went back to North Korea as a Korean American doctor and found his younger sister. So I wrote about that reunion of what we call a divided family when I was a young journalist. And I was thinking about that and sharing that story again with his passing at the age of almost 90, 89 last week. And so that, with a heavy heart, I'm remembering one of these original stories from my own personal community. But that's just to explain that as a Korean American, in some ways we grow up with these stories about the families left behind and the connection that we have to North Korea. So I grew up with this curiosity about that northern half of the country that is part of our heritage. And I think as we've watched South Korea blossom and really grow over the decades, I've seen it, of course, throughout my own life as well. And as we've watched North Korea grow more isolated in the process, I think I have been drawn to this call or this challenge to shed some light on this very hidden society. First as a journalist, which was my professional background, and then later as a policy analyst, which is what I do now. I will say that North Korea is one of the least understood, one of the most misunderstood, and one of the most underestimated countries in the world. And I think that that lack of understanding has had and will have enormous consequences for our global security. And I think it means that the people of North Korea also, it's not just the security threat, which we hear a lot about, but I think it also means that the people of North Korea remain very overlooked and that they are very disconnected from the outside world. And I think as a journalist and as a policy analyst, I try to focus not only on the threat that the regime poses, which is certainly what they want us to see, it's part of their strategy, but I also try to focus as much as I can, because I've had such unusual access inside North Korea. I try to focus on the people of North Korea and what the leadership's policies mean for them on a daily basis. So that is really, as a journalist, I've always tried to look for the stories that are not told and what country has more of a hidden society for us than North Korea.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your experience and your opinion on North Korea, and then how to perceive and how to understand North Korea, and your say motivation, starting point for being a North Korea focused journalist, and then now is policy analyst and expert. With the best friend, father, his story, it's just amazing, and you just said. He actually went back as a medical doctor, and then contribute to this health situation in North Korea, and found his younger sister. And then
Yes.
could you tell me a little bit more about their story, and what about what happened to this brother and sister, separated for quite a long time?
For us in America, the pain of the divided families is something, this is a story that I grew up with. So I always grew up with this story that his family was in North Korea. He created a new life. I always found it fascinating because we were raised as Americans. I will tell you that his children, they're very American, don't speak Korean. We grew up with our heritage, but of course, at that time when we were growing up in America, it's not like today where everybody wants to.
Yeah, I mean, Midwest, Minnesota, we are talking about, right?
Yes, and our families were the first families in Minnesota. It's very different today. There are a lot of Koreans in Minnesota, and there's so much awareness of everything related to South Korea globally. Right? South Korea, everybody's obsessed with everything Korean. But for us, it was very difficult to maintain our language and our culture. Our parents sent us to Korean school, but so we always knew that his family and that he left his family behind. I was very curious. The time when I really asked him to sit down and tell me the entire story was in 2000, almost exactly. Oh my gosh. 25 years ago, right? Because if you remember, that was when we had the first inter-Korean summit. And that was when I was just starting out as a foreign correspondent. And I wanted to share a little bit of what this inter-Korean summit, the meeting of the leader of North Korea and the leader of South Korea, would mean for somebody whose family was divided. So that was when I sat down with him to hear his story. So it was a fascinating story in the sense that they're so synchronized with the parades and the performances. But I did find that they were very opinionated, as long as you didn't ask them about their leadership. So they know what they can talk about and what they cannot talk about. Sure. But I think that I really valued the opportunity to learn. In the process of trying to turn me into a North Korean, I could really learn more about their culture, what it is they took pride in, what, the quirks about their language. And I always explain that, for example, when you go into a restaurant in North Korea, what you say from the beginning to the end is completely different than what we would say in South Korea. So it was like I had to learn an alternate dialect or language, but also an alternate culture. And what I will say, for example, is what I ate in North Korea was entirely different than what we think of as North Korean food in South Korea. And so one of the things I'm interested in is making sure that we document and share how their culture, pop culture, their food culture, all of these different parts of daily life are evolving in North Korea in ways that we are not capturing because we're not there. Of course, I will say that defectors are an incredible, escapees and defectors are an incredible resource for that. And I would encourage them to share that, for them to tell us what their daily lives are like, because just like South Korea, it keeps evolving. The language keeps evolving. And I think it's important for us to capture that and record that.
Yeah, then what about their dreams, lifetime goals? And then I think it's in South Korea, the United States, or say Singapore, in the UK, France, the new generation has new dream. Of course, I want to be rich, I want to be healthy, I want to find a good partner, on and on and on. Scientist or say prime minister, and doctors and an athlete. I think you met many people in North Korea, and especially young generation too. And then what are their say lifetime goal? And then I think it's of course they have different value system a little bit, goals. And then do you remember any interesting goal of lifetime, from when you talk to the young people in 2010s?
Yeah, one of the interesting things is, of course, they were so interested to know more about my life, both in South Korea and in the United States. And so that, I think, was whenever I was able to bring. So for many years, we weren't allowed to bring phones into North Korea, our own phones. We had to lock them up in a locker at the airport in Pyongyang. I usually left my phone in Beijing. But I was able to bring, for many years, I was able to bring a device that didn't have a phone function. It was an iPod Touch. So it's a little bit, it's like a little iPad, right? So I was able to bring that because it didn't have a phone function. And I would load photos onto it. And they would always they loved the iPod Touch to look at what my phone, this device. First of all, they're interested in the technology, but then also my photos. They really wanted to, it just makes you realize that just like we're curious about them, they're so curious about us. And I think I represent what we call kind of like, just like I was saying, I sometimes imagine who would I have been if my family had been in North Korea. I think they also look at me and imagine, who would I have been if I had been in South Korea or the United States? And I think that curiosity was always really fascinating. And one of the questions, or when I would ask the North Koreans, where would you go if you could go to South Korea? And 100% of the time they would say, I want to go to Jeju-do. So they grow up with this idea, just like we, and I think South Koreans often say, I will go to Baekdusan. Right? The North Koreans would say, I want to go to Jeju-do. So it's very interesting that they also have these kinds of dreams about what it would be like if Korea were unified, and I'm always curious, where would they want to go? I think that they had a lot of the elites have more exposure to South Korea than we think, right? Of course, we can't generalize, because the scale of the range of experiences in North Korea is much broader than we give them credit for. But one of the interesting things, of course, is that many elites do, before the border was closed, spent quite a bit of time abroad. And their first, when I was in Beijing and I would meet with North Korean officials, they would always want to meet at Tu Le Jour, which is a South Korean, the South Korean bakery. Yeah. And so, exactly. And I always found that interesting, that that's where the North Koreans wanted to meet, because that's very much but to them, if they're abroad, anything South Korean is more familiar or more enticing than anything that is not. So that kind of thing was interesting to me. And I also, there was an interesting episode during that time, Psy and Gangnam Style was really popular. And for some reason, on my iPod Touch, I had that one song on my phone, Gangnam Style, because back then it was popular, and it wasn't for the
Yeah,
North
right,
Koreans,
right.
but
2012,
friends,
13.
yeah, the whole world loved that song.
That's right.
And so, but for some reason, it kept going off. It kept playing automatically by itself on my phone, on my iPod Touch. And finally, I let the North Koreans listen to it. And I told them, this is the #1 song right now in the world. And they were so proud in a weird way. They said, oh, a Korean person wrote the #1 song in the world. And so I think that those are kinds of insights that I take with me, that despite the rhetoric, despite the official policies, there's a lot of curiosity about South Korea, some of a sense of pride, right? These are the kinds of things that we may not hear because we don't have much interaction with Koreans
agree.
apart from the propaganda.
Great. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an excellent, the experience, to listen to you, and then you are a journalist. At the same time, you are a North Korea expert and then analyst, thinker, I can say. If you are participating in National Geographic or Discovery Channel or the BBC documentary series making on North Korea, what are the most, say, intriguing, from your point of view, based upon your experience in a subject? What do you recommend? And
so I will say that the area that I'm spending most of my time on right now is the North Korean hackers. We call them
the hackers.
Yes. And the reason is it's not, so I have a podcast for the BBC called The Lazarus Heist. It's a narrative series, and we've had 2 seasons, and we're working on a bonus episode right now. And I like to say that I try to explain that I am not a cybersecurity expert. I am looking at this because we need to look at where the money is coming from to fund the nuclear program, because that nuclear program really is the threat that could affect all of us. It is the elephant in the room. It's very hard to look at anything or discuss anything about North Korea unless we address the nuclear program, right? So I'm very interested in how are they financing, how are they paying for it? Now, this investigation comes out of my time in North Korea, because while I was there in the early years of Kim Jong-un's rule, right? I was there for all of his early milestones.
진 리가 북한의 자금과 해커 집단을 추적하고 싶다고 말했던 것처럼 북한의 어두운 면은 우리가 상상하는 것 이상으로 전 세계와 연결되어 있습니다. 이번 시즌 니콜라스 레비 박사와 라미지 연구원은 북한의 IT 개발자 인력이 러시아, 중국을 넘어서 다수 국가에서 양성된다는 사실도 밝혀냈습니다. 북한은 고립된 것이 아니라 국제정세의 빈틈을 이용하는 전략적 플레이어에 가깝습니다. 일성 시대부터 내려온 통일이라는 민족의 수건을 공식적으로 파괴하고 남북을 2개의 적대적 국가로 규정했습니다. 통일을 상징하던 수많은 기념물들이 북한 땅에서 사라지고 있습니다. 단순한 민족주의적 통일 담론 수준은 아니겠지만 차가운 경제산업적 사회구조적 협력이 반드시 이루어지는 한반도의 2 국가 관계가 필요하지 않을까요? 하지만 정권이 통일이라는 단어를 지울 수는 있어도 뚜레쥬르 빵 맛을 궁금해하고 제주도를 꿈꾸는 사람들의 마음까지 지울 수는 없겠죠. 정치와 이념이 아무리 서로를 밀어내도 사람과 문화에 대한 애착과 호기심, 그리고 경제적인 이익은 남아있기 때문입니다. 언젠가 평양의 뚜레쥬르 파리바게뜨, 롯데리아 1호점이 문을 여는 그날을 기다려봅니다.